So just to give you an idea, I spoke about how particularly Imam Walid Muhammad or Walid Muhammad transformed the nation of Islam into Sunni Islam. Today I want to spend time talking about what led up to 1975 when we took over. So we're going to go start back in 1865. So we're going to take a lesson in history today. And two disclaimers. Number one, it's going to be short. Not that there's not enough to talk about, but I'll try to keep it to the point, short, so you can actually benefit from it, enjoy it, and inshallah go do your own research. So I'm not going to make it long at all, inshallah. And the second thing is, by no means am I an expert at this. I'm going to kind of jump around because I don't know all of this off the back of my head. So I'm going to be looking at the paper a little bit, so I might be a little confusing. So if you need any clarification, just ask. And if I don't know something, I'll just tell you I have no idea. And you can find it in another place. So inshallah, will be short, to the point, and hopefully beneficial for everyone. So let's go back and to 1866. In North Carolina, in 1866, there's a man born by the name of Timothy Drew. Timothy Drew was born in North Carolina on January 8th, 1886, actually, 1886. In the books of history, it says his mother was a Native American. A Native American from the Cherokee tribe. And there's dispute whether his father was Native American as well, or he was a Moroccan Muslim. He was a Moroccan Muslim. There's no real trace on him. So he was born in North Carolina again in 1886. He used to travel a lot. He was some sort of businessman. He used to travel a lot. And on one of his trips to Egypt, he ran into what he called the Great Magician. He was apparently involved in a lot of magic and mysticism. And the historians say that this person learned a lot from him. And he basically learned a lot of, the religions. He learned, from all his travels, he learned a lot from his religion. But the most influential part was his trip to Egypt and his interactions with these Egyptian magicians. And he got to the point where he pretty much made up his own religion with a combination of this stuff. And you will see it was called the Moorish Science Temple. It has many names, like the Moorish American Temple of Science, or it's a Moorish Temple of Science, basically. Now, the basis for that was heavily influenced by Islam. He claimed that this Egyptian man gave him, a lost part of the Quran that was never revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. And he made many other claims like that. So you can see it was a compilation of all his influences that he had come across in his interactions. So in 1913, in New Jersey, he founded the Moorish Science Temple of America. In 1913, in New Jersey, he founded this completely new kind of religion, influenced by Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, and a few other influences. It was such a kind of a radical idea at the time that eventually he was forced out of New Jersey, and in 1925 he moved to Chicago. And in Chicago he had a heavy presence. And they say by the end of 1930 there were over 30,000 followers of the Moorish Temple, Science Temple in Chicago alone, over 30,000. And he, on his way from New Jersey to Chicago, he, gained a few followers. So he was he had planted seeds in many of these cities, right? So this guy grew and eventually, on a side note, among his followers, he became known as Drew Ali. Drew Ali, the Prophet. So his official title that he gave himself was Drew Ali the Prophet. So he was known amongst his followers as a prophet. I'm not sure if he claimed to be divine or not, but it was pretty much close to that. Now, he died in 1929. In 1929, he died in Chicago. Some people say he was killed by the police. Some people say, some of his followers that didn't like him killed him. Anyway, he was in Chicago, he was very influential. If you go back, there are a lot of pictures you can find online of him. Timothy Drew or Drew Ali, the Prophet. If you Google that, you'll see a lot of pictures. In Chicago, he was a prominent person. He was a prominent person. If you were living in Chicago, you knew about it. There are pictures with the governor of Illinois, some congressmen, some heavy businessmen. So he was well known amongst the people, right? So he died in 1929 on July 20th, as I mentioned. Okay, so he's dead, right? He's gone. One of his close followers was named Fard Muhammad. Now, that's one of his names. You will see why later on why it's so confusing. This guy named Fard Muhammad, or Wallace Muhammad, or the 10 other names that he has, he was born in 1893. He was born in 1893 on February 22nd. Now, the problem with this guy is he was a mystery figure. No one knows where he's from. Some people say he's from New Zealand. He wasn't African American. Even Timothy Drew, he wasn't African American. So this person, Fard Muhammad or Wallace Muhammad, some people, the historians say he's from New Zealand. He moved to the U.S. Some people say no, he was born in Oregon. Some people say he was born here. So from the start, as a historical figure, he's very confusing. He was one of Drew Ali's or Timothy Drew's close followers. In 1931, let's move to Fard Muhammad and look into the history a little bit. So within the Moorish Science Temple, he was known as David Ford. This guy named Fard Muhammad, he was known as David Ford among the temple. So he moved to Detroit in 1930 from Chicago, and this was after Timothy Drew or Drew Ali had passed away. So in 1929, when Drew Ali passed away, Fard Muhammad was one of the people fighting to take leadership of the Moorish Church, of the Moorish Science Church. So he was managing the finances after Drew Ali passed away, and after a failed attempt to become the next leader, he left Chicago and moved to Detroit. Now, there's so many historical points about this guy, just to give you some. Another name that he's registered at is Fred Dodd. Fred, D-O-D-D. And then in 1916 and 1917, they pulled up some historical records of military service. He came up as Fard Muhammad, then he came up as Wallace Muhammad, and then he came up as Wallace Dodd Fard. So he was all over all over the place, a very mysterious guy. But it was clear he used to be a businessman. He had restaurants. He used to travel. There are documents showing that in 1916 he was in LA. He's all over the place, this guy. But in 1930 he's in Detroit. He was one of the followers of Drew Ali. And now in 1930, when he moved to Detroit, he established his own church. He established his own church. And some other points about him. These are just kind of side notes. In 1920, in the U.S. Census, he reported his race as white, and in 1924, he reported his race as Hispanic. So in 1926, he was put in jail for bootlegging alcohol because there was a prohibition at the time. And in 1929, he was actually released from jail. That's when he found about the Moorish Science Church. And then he became one of the followers, and after Drew Ali's death, he moved to Chicago. So I know, right off the bat, I've confused you all, I'm sorry. So now he's in Detroit, and it's 1930. He tried to take leadership of the Moorish Science Church, he failed. In Detroit, he established something called the Allah Temple of Islam. In 1930 in Detroit, he established the Allah Temple of Islam. And he established the University of Islam. It wasn't a university, it was actually a school where they taught kids from a young age up to 12th grade about their so-called religion. In 1932, one of his followers, and they used to associate themselves with Islam, they used the terms, they used Allah, they said they followed the Quran. In 1932, one of his followers in Detroit killed someone and said this was for the sake of Allah. Sound familiar? In 1932, he killed someone in Detroit and he said this is for the sake of Allah. So the police basically filed a case against Fard Muhammad, we'll call him. And there was a case against him, but he was never convicted. So in 1933, many of his followers and him were causing so many problems in Detroit that the police department asked him to leave the city. So the Detroit Police Department in 1933 asked Fard Muhammad to leave the city. And he did, he left. But he came back secretly the next year, in 1934. Because he was still the leader, he was still in control, and he came back. And he was causing more problems. And the same problems were going, so the Detroit Police Department told him again, get out of the city. And he left. This is the last official trace of this guy in the history books. And I'll give you all the theories of what happened to him. But this is the last official trace of this guy named Fard Muhammad. Some say that even though he left, he lived up to 1960. And there are different theories of what happened to him. Listen to this. One says he moved back to New Zealand. He took a trip back to New Zealand and he moved there. Some of his followers said no, he moved to Mecca. Because he's from Mecca, so he moved back to Mecca. Some said, listen to this, this was a big scholar, I forgot his name, in the 1990s, he did research and he said he disguised himself as an Ahmadiyya Muslim from Pakistan and it remained in the US. And he has his own proof. And this is crazy, I mean, look at this guy. And others, listen to this, others say that he changed his identity, changed his name, and stayed part of the Moorish church that became Nation of Islam and worked under Elijah Muhammad. So there's no definite answer of what happened to this guy. So 1934 was the last trace of him. Right. You get the picture. There was Drew Ali, or Timothy Drew. Then there was Fard Muhammad. Now he disappears. Now one of Fard Muhammad's close students was Elijah Muhammad. One of his close students was Elijah Muhammad. And how Elijah Muhammad met Fard Muhammad was Elijah Muhammad, and as a side note, Elijah Muhammad was an activist. You know, when there were protests against, where the black people used to get together and protest for their rights, he was very vocal, visible, and active. His wife came to him one day and said, you have to go meet this guy. Like, he's preaching a new religion, he's empowering the black person to have their own identity. So, Elijah Muhammad, his name was Elijah Pole. His name was Elijah Pole and his wife's name was Clara Pole. So Clara Pole told Elijah Pole that, hey, we need to go meet this guy, Fard Muhammad, he has a new religion, we need to follow it. And eventually, after the disappearance of Fard Muhammad in 1934, Elijah Muhammad took over the Allah Temple of Islam. He took over the Allah Temple of Islam. And Elijah Muhammad at the time claimed, and this is actually their official position today, the Nation of Islam. I'm not going to talk about them much, like today, they're still around. Their official position today is that Fard Muhammad was Allah who was walking on earth. And now, he's gone back to the mothership. The mothership, they claim to be this, I guess it's a ship, that it's somewhere in the universe where, Fard Muhammad has gone back and is looking over everyone. That's the basic concept. I don't know if it's exactly those details, but it's called the mothership and they claim that he's over there. And even at one time, Elijah Muhammad, right after he took over, he claimed that Fard Muhammad was the Mahdi and he's gone to Makkah to prepare his army to bring him back. So, there's a lot of historical context to that. All right, now let's move on to Elijah Pole, who changed his name to Elijah Muhammad after he took over the Allah Temple of Islam. Elijah Pole, or Elijah Muhammad, was born in Georgia in the late 1800s. Whoa, that was close. We're good. So he was born in the late 1800s in Detroit, and in 1931 he was introduced to Father Muhammad, and in 1934 he took over the Nation of Islam. Now, in his initial years, even until actually the 1960s, the Nation of Islam wasn't really popular. It wasn't well known. It was growing very slowly, but the burst that it got after the Civil Rights Movement, it wasn't the same as it was before. So when he took over in 1934, he changed the name to the Nation of Islam. He called it the Nation of Islam. So that was when the name came about, that we are the Nation of Islam. And he preached black power, that Islam is for the African American, white man is the devil, and that, Allah is empowering the black person, and, the black person was the original human being. All this kind of stuff, he started promoting that. He went to jail in, I believe it was the 1950s or 60s, I'm not sure, for refusing again to, I think it's whenever World War I was. When was that? Sorry. 1918. So whenever that was, he basically, he refused a draft to serve in the military, and he went to jail for that for a few years. Now, in 1946, the Nation of Islam had 4 temples. In 1946, the Nation of Islam had 4 temples, mainly in the Northeast. By 1955, they had 15 temples. And then by 1959, they had 50 temples in 22 states. So you could see up to 1959, there was growth, but it was relatively slow compared to what was coming after. Then in 1960, the Civil Rights era started, and that's when the boost came, where all the African American population, all of them were looking to attach to something. And that's when exponential growth took place in the Nation of Islam, and they became what they were known for. Now, in the early 1970s, the Nation of Islam was pretty much in every major city in the U.S. Like I told you, they had over 300 temples across the nation in every major city in the U.S. And listen to this, the Nation of Islam as an organization owned over 15,000 acres of land. They're financially extremely strong. Like I told you, even though their theology was off, from a leadership and a growth perspective, a lot of the stuff Elijah Muhammad did was genius. They acquired 15,000 acres of land. They owned their own trucking and air transportation systems across the U.S. They owned barbershops, bakeries, coffee shops, grocery stores, newspapers, and their own publishing company, where they used to publish newspapers talking about the Nation of Islam. It had many names. It was called Muhammad Speaks, and then it changed names many times, but they were financially very, very powerful. Very powerful, and that contributed to a lot of the growth that they had. Now, in 1974, the Nation of Islam, their net worth was estimated at close to $80 million. In 1974, their net worth was estimated at close to $80 million, which was pretty significant, given where they were 10 years prior to that. Now, a few other points, actually, we're coming close to the end. I wasn't lying when I said it's going to be very short. Malcolm X, where does Malcolm X come into the picture? So Malcolm X, as I told you, in 1963, when JFK was assassinated, and first of all, Malcolm X was the national spokesperson for the Nation of Islam. He was the national spokesperson. In 1963, when JFK, President John F. Kennedy, was assassinated, Elijah Muhammad had an event scheduled where he was supposed to speak. I don't remember exactly which city it was, but he was supposed to speak. So he told Malcolm X, cancel the event. Because, the president of the country is just tired. Let's cancel it, in honor or remembrance, whatever. Malcolm X said no. He was extremely confrontational. He said, good, we should celebrate the death of a white man. And he said, we're going to do this. So whatever event he was having, he had it. And at the event, which I think that video is online, a lot of these videos are online. He spoke, extremely from very harsh perspectives towards the white man at this event the day John F. Kennedy died. So Elijah Muhammad kicked him out after this and said, "You're no longer the spokesperson, you violated my orders." So this is when Malcolm X broke apart from the Nation of Islam. Now, in 1964, Malcolm X had his own journey. I'm sure a lot of you have read his biography or seen the movie. He had his own journey. And he founded, then he eventually became a Sunni Muslim, and he founded his own masjid and his own mosque. We're not going to go into that. In 1965, because he had a lot of enemies, Malcolm X was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. And many of the people to this day say that Elijah Muhammad ordered his assassination. And I don't know what details there are to the case, but I did read something that Elijah Muhammad never denied not doing it. He never said, "No, we didn't do it." In fact, there's some statements saying we deal with our traitors the way we want to deal with them. There's some statements like that online. So there was a big, obviously people were pointing fingers that he was responsible for the death of Malcolm X as well. Now, after the death of Elijah Muhammad, as I mentioned in the khutbah, that's where we talked about the khutbah, in 1975 onwards, his son Wallace D. Muhammad. And Wallace D. Muhammad, W.D. Muhammad, is actually named after Fard Muhammad, whose one of his names was Wallace. That's why Elijah Muhammad named him Wallace. That's what the name comes from. Took over and changed the Nation of Islam, to Sunni Muslim. And before I go into that, there are a couple of points over here. Elijah Muhammad had a total of 21 children from 5 different women. He had a total of 21 children from 5 different women, and that's part of the reason Malcolm X said he broke off, because he didn't believe Elijah Muhammad was really on the right track. After Elijah Muhammad passed away, 19 of those children got together and filed a lawsuit against Imam W.D. Muhammad and his community to get back all the financial assets of that agency, of the organization. Because they said, he was our father, he was supporting us, so we have rights to him. So they actually sued him, but they lost. They lost and they got nothing in return. Now, the Nation of Islam, like I mentioned again, in 1975 when Imam W. Muhammad took over, he transitioned into Sunni Islam. But there was a guy named Farah Khan. He was one of the close followers of Elijah Muhammad, even up till his death. He had initially had pledged allegiance to the leadership of Imam W.D. Muhammad, but he didn't like the direction he was going in. So, a few years after Imam W.D. Muhammad took over, he broke off and restarted the Nation of Islam. And he restarted the Nation of Islam, and the same teachings that Elijah Muhammad was preaching, he kept on preaching, and to this day, Farah Khan is alive, and he's the leader of the Nation of Islam. You occasionally see him appearing on TV. There's actually even a 60-minute special on him that was aired not too long ago. So a lot of these historical figures are alive and present today, and having their own influences. The Nation of Islam today, I don't really know how strong they are. I know they have a presence in Houston. I know they have a pretty big presence as well. But I don't know what their size and their capabilities are today, but I know they are present and they are visible. And the most recently they came on the news because during Obama's first campaign in 2008, right? 2008, Farah Khan had endorsed Obama as he's a good person. He basically publicly endorsed him, and then blew up on the news. And then Obama said, "No, I don't need his endorsement. I have nothing to do with this guy." So that's the most recently when he came on the news. So, point being, Farah Khan and the Nation of Islam are still around today. They're still present in major cities, and they still have the same beliefs that Elijah Muhammad carried on. And the rest of the community that Imam W.D. Muhammad brought over to Sunni Islam are also very much alive and present. They have hundreds of mosques all over the city, and they're slowly but surely, mixing with the general Muslim community. So it's really, really amazing. And also another side note, this is just one piece of the history of this country, right? I'm sure there's and I know for a fact there are a lot of other Muslim-related historical events going on. This is just one. I'm not saying this was the only one going on. But the point being, and why I'm sharing all of this is with you, Allah has told us again, we need to reflect on history and see how, 100 years ago, Allah was setting up for what we have today in this country. And, history empowers us to move forward and seeing the mistakes that the nations before us, or the people before us made, and the successes that it had, as I mentioned in the khutbah. So, to summarize the basic history of the Nation of Islam, there was Timothy Drew, late 1800s, then Fard Muhammad, who has 10 different names, came along, and then Elijah Muhammad broke off on his own thing, and then eventually Imam W. Muhammad brought a chunk of that into Sunni Islam, and then Farrakhan took a lot of it to the Nation of Islam. This is just, a basic overview of how Islam, and mainly the African American community, has built up to today. So again, this is not by any measure a very detailed, detailed study of it. This is just a basic knowing for all of us. So with that, I have concluded. I have not much else to say, and if you have any questions or need any clarification, I'll be glad to answer that. Yes, sir.
Okay, one thing I noticed, like these people over the past, like they have created all these religions or sects or whatever, followers, but they have been, like they use the words like Allah or Islam or these things. Is that okay? I mean, by the law of the land, I guess?
Sure.
Of what you have studied, I guess.
So your question is basically, all these random sects are claiming words like Allah and Islam, and that belong to usually, are associated with other people.
Yeah, because like in the corporate world, if somebody uses, some Joe Schmo opens an Apple computers or something, there will be big, you can't really use
Sure.
it. So is it okay for religion to be used like
So
that?
essentially the question is, are religious terms trademarked or patented? I have no idea. No, that's a good question actually. Otherwise anyone can claim to do it. I don't know. I know that the government officially recognizes like certain things in order to qualify as religion, but I don't know. It's a great point. That's something to look forward to look into. Yes, sir.
What was W.D. Muhammad's response to Malcolm X's assassination? Like, what's their connection? I didn't really see if there was a connection.
So the question, what was Imam W.D. Muhammad's and Malcolm X's relationship and connection? So they grew up in the Nation of Islam together. They knew each other very well. They worked at the time. How close they were and what happened during that time, I don't know. That's a great question. And on that note, I forgot to mention. So in all of this history, like I mentioned, a lot of these historical figures are alive today. One of the personal bodyguards of Elijah Muhammad is alive today. One of his personal bodyguards were called honor guards. And he's actually, alhamdulillah, he's a Muslim. He knows Arabic, he studied Quran. He's a very wise man, mashallah. And he's in Houston, and he recently moved there. So I would encourage this community to invite him and ask him about his story, which is it's just amazing. You can imagine, he was on the inside of all of this. He was not only Elijah Muhammad's bodyguard, he was one of the personal students of W.D. Muhammad. He spent 15 years with him. The first group that went to Hajj with Imam W.D. Muhammad in 1977, he was part of that group as well. So this person is really, really amazing. His name is Imam Qasim Ahmad. He's in Houston. You have to have him here, and I'm sure you can only imagine the stories he has to tell and the insight that he can give you. Now, I just gave you factual figures.
Just add on, Imam Wazir comes to this community a lot, so just
and so all of you know Imam Wazir Ali, or you've heard of him, right? Imam Wazir Ali is a direct student of Imam Qasim Ahmad. Imam Qasim Ahmad is Imam Wazir Ali's teacher. And Imam Wazir Ali also, is part of the Imam W. Muhammad's community. So he knows a lot about that as well. He doesn't speak about it much. If you ask him to, he will. So, like I said, I just gave you an external overview to get insight from these people who are actually there, who are going through these changes and feeling it. I'm sure it's a whole different ballgame. So I encourage you to invite them.
So how is it that these people
Are you talking about the Nation of Islam specifically?
Yeah, I mean, because I'm assuming they still identify as, do they identify as Muslims or?
So the Nation of Islam, do they identify as Muslims, and how do they believe what they believe? I do know they identify themselves as Muslims. They use all the terminology, and they do claim publicly that they're Muslim. As far as why they follow Allah, I don't know. The Quran's there. I don't know what they're encouraged to do, but people believe what they believe. I don't know that. And that's where, Imam Qasim can give you some insight, but I don't know why they specifically follow what they follow. It's just, I'm sure it's their personal choice. They're not forced into it, but why they do it, Allah knows best. Yeah.
So, I know earlier in the khutbah you stated that, like, the immigrant community doesn't necessarily, they haven't meshed well with Imam al-Din Muhammad's community, right?
No, I didn't say that.
Well, no, not necessarily, but there's been rifts through it, right? Like, what extractions can we take, since they've been in this American community for so long? There's a lot of, like, wisdom and stuff we can take. What are some steps that we can go towards it to kind of do it from?
So Taha mentioned that the Imam W.D. Muhammad, the African American community of Muslims, and the immigrant community of the Muslims, they've not, the interaction is not as much as it shouldn't be, as it should be. So what wisdoms can we take? I'll clearly say, I wasn't even born when a lot of this stuff was happening. So just to me to give solutions to that, I wouldn't really know. I know there have been attempts, a long time ago where communities attempted to mix, but there were issues because of cultural differences mainly. Mainly it was because of cultural differences. The immigrant community bringing their culture, and then the African American community bringing its own culture. So there were some rifts, and this is where I clearly say I wasn't even born at that time. So, but there are individuals. How many of you know Sheikh Yasir Qadi? Right, Hamza is a pretty well-known speaker. His father is one of the founders of the Muslim community in Houston. Like literally, he's one of the founders of the Muslim community in Houston. And he's had a lot of interactions, even with, I believe, Imam W. Muhammad and his community. So these, that type of wisdom, you need to go back to these people and talk about. I'm sure Imam Qasim Ahmad, I keep talking about him because he's a gem that many people don't know about. He's really a gem. Like I told you, his insight into the Quran and the life of the Prophet ﷺ is amazing. Here's one note I'll make as an external individual. So how I interact with all this, one of my good friends is from that community, and Imam Qasim Ahmad is his relative. So learning about this has been really amazing, and I've made a couple of observations. I haven't verified these as being correct or incorrect, but that community, the African American community, when they came to Islam and studied the Quran, they came to it with a free mind, with no influence, no boundaries, or no restrictions. And let me give you an example. Suppose we were, if I was to open the Quran today and start saying, these are my reflections, this is how I feel about it. There's a lot of saying, hey, you need to know fiqh, you need to know this, you need to know that. You need to go and talk to an expert, all this kind of stuff. That community coming out of slavery, they're very free-minded. We're going to do this on our own. So they studied the Quran in the American context, in the American culture, without any external cultural influences. So they came up with their own reflections of the Quran and applied it here. And they learned Islam in the American context. They had no external influence. They didn't bring any cultures from the Middle East, from Asia, from Africa. They didn't bring any of these cultures. They studied Islam in the American context. So how Islam should generally be applied in America, I think that community is closer than we are. Because we've carried our cultural contexts over here. And we still, I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, it's a fact. But this community has no influence when approaching the Quran. They come straight, inshallah, with a good heart and with the American cultural context. So their insights may be more valuable to the Muslims in America than people living overseas. And another thing is that community coming out of, even until 1960s, right, a black person wasn't allowed to sit in the same restaurant, use the same bathroom. So they're coming, you have to understand where this community is coming from. they've been oppressed, treated like second-class citizens most of their lives that they lived. So when someone comes to them and tells them what to do, they don't put up with that. They're like, thank you very much, we got this. Don't tell us what to do. We just came out of slavery. We're not going to become inferior to you again. So you have to really understand where that community comes from when we try to approach it. And I think a lot of the mistakes that were made was not understanding where they came from. So again, by all means, this is something a lot of the people who were present will give you a deeper insight into that. But just some random thoughts. Just one more.
I was really surprised that you said it still exists now, it still exists in conditions, because I thought as an outsider, I feel that the civil rights movement and the racism the African American community went through is the major driven force for that movement, for the nation of Islam. So if that being said, if this movement does not exist right now, so why does it exist? Because that's the vision. It's more than an ideological vision. My question is, the first actually was related to what Taha said, how the other communities in the US, not other than African American, were successful to be inclusive for the African American community as an alternative for the nation of Islam. And the second question is, here in the US, I'm curious to know the Americans here, when they see the relation between Islam and the civil rights movement, do they relate it much more with the nation of Islam, with the deformed, ideology and beliefs, or do they relate it much more to modern-based Islam?
Okay, so just to be clear, they were asking if, number one, the Nation of Islam, their main pull was during the civil rights movement, of empowering the black person. If that's gone, what's their kind of call to action today? And the second thing you said was, are they examples of other movements that have integrated the African American community during the civil rights movement, right? And what was your last one?
The last one is how the relation between the Islam and
how people associate Islam and the nation.
the example of the nation of Islam, or the example of modern rights.
Okay, so the last question you asked is, when the average American thinks about Islam, do they associate it, with the civil rights, Malcolm X movement, or do they associate it with something else? No, I don't know.
Specifically for the period of time.
In that period of time, I don't know. That's I'm going to refer back to Imam Qasim Ahmad. You can ask him that. I don't know about that. And the other example, number two, also I don't know. I know there were a lot of other movements during that time, and how successful they were and how they were not. I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know that. And the first question was, since the call to black empowerment and getting your rights is gone, what did the Nation of Islam call to today? I know that they're trying to be much more inclusive. They still don't have the same call, but they still do have that black superiority banner. They still carry that. They still preach some of the black superiority. How effective that is and what's working, what's not, I'm not sure. So this is all a lot of history, but that's a great question. I'm actually curious about that too. So whenever we have Imam Qasim Ahmad, I'll come with him. Yes?
Question, you talk about Imam W.D. Muhammad. I mean, when he was growing up, obviously he born in a leadership community and he had financial backing. And people does not look at him as a leader, but as a god, basically, the status he had. So how hard for him to change the direction? I mean, compared to an ordinary person standing up and changing, compared for him, he have all the tools and resources.
Absolutely. So your question was Imam W.D. Muhammad, the situation he was in, the status that he had, it must have been very difficult for him to, take it in a completely other direction versus someone who didn't have all these boundaries and opposition. And that's one of the things I didn't mention at all, and that's, may Allah have mercy on Imam W.D. Muhammad. He faced a lot of opposition. Internally, there was a lot of opposition. There were even talks at times where people were going to try to assassinate him. There's a lot of opposition internally, but alhamdulillah, he kept his trust in Allah, and he was clear about what he wanted. He was clear, like I said. He said he believed. He didn't believe any of the stuff his father preached, and it was difficult for him to make the transition. You can imagine there was a lot of internal opposition. There were people revolting against him. Farrakhan left and broke off, but alhamdulillah, Allah guided the hearts of the people that he was in leadership with. So it happened. As far as the details, That's something we have to look into history of how he exactly did it piece by piece. But alhamdulillah, Allah granted him a lot of wisdom. As I mentioned before, a lot of his talks are online. He was alive until 2008. A lot of his talks are online. A lot of his speeches, a lot of the conferences he attended are online, so you can listen to him and kind of get a feel of what type of man he was. And subhanAllah, but from what I've listened to him, you can feel the sincerity of him. I just every time I see him, I was like, subhanAllah, he was a giant of Islam. Anywhere in the world of what he's done. May Allah have mercy on him. That brother has a question.
Two points. The first one has to do with why the immigrant community didn't so integrate well. And the answer is very simple. The reality is we are deeply racist. We may want to deny it, but that's the truth. The second thing is with respect to people coming over from the Nation of Islam. You've got to remember the ministers had a lot of power, there were a lot of financial incentives. So it was not that easy for them to actually give up. And even some of the ministers who came into the W.D. Muhammad group, they were not as educated. And I actually visited one of their masjids in Rochester, New York, and the guy was saying, well, Musa didn't really speak when he was a baby. This was just, it's like when I become Muslim, it's like you're speaking from a cradle. So, and Allah didn't save Bani Israel by this miraculously parting the sea and all of that. So they were actually denying, and this is their Imam actually. So essentially they were not, even though they had accepted Islam, quote unquote, there were big gaps in the knowledge of some of the ministers. And obviously overnight you're not going to.
Exactly. Great point, absolutely great point.
So there were some distorted views still continuing.
Yeah, great point. So the first point that the brother made was that the immigrant community, why we didn't mix with them, is because there's still a lot of racism in the immigrant community, and he's right. I know a lot of people that when they walk in, it's unfortunate, but I'm being real over here. When an African American brother walks in, it raises a red flag. Be careful of this guy. Keep an eye on him. If he goes next to the money box, be careful. It's still alive. We laugh about it. It's still alive. I see it myself. A lot of the people that I know, they still do that. It's really, really hard because we do the same things that we accuse other people of. So it's very much alive today, especially in the immigrant community. And in Houston, as example, a lot of the immigrant Muslims, they own businesses, right? Gas stations, stores, cell phone stores, all this kind of stuff. So whenever an African American walks in, they tell the employee, just be careful of this guy, and so they keep the camera on him. This stuff is alive happening today, so I'm sure that contributes to that. And the other point the brother was making is that when the Nation of Islam did come over to Sunni Islam, they still weren't as educated, and they still had beliefs, I guess, that were not really correct. And that's where a lot of the rift happened. Actually, when the immigrant community heard these things, they're like, oh, come on, let us teach you. We're better than you. We know the religion more than you. So that that turned them off even more. So great point. And in Northeast, the presidency, that's where it all started. So it's much more. Great point. I think about that.
Another question I have, the past is gone now. So you're the face of the next generation in this country. You're running a great organization. Let's say the president of this country want to speak to the Muslims. Who is the spokesperson? Who is the face and the leadership unite? And one person said, either we do it or we don't. So what kind of work have done, or what do you look at that?
So the brother's question was that the past is the past. We're here now. So how what unites the community? Is there like a united voice to when there are issues? The answer is no. The Muslim community is still divided. Alhamdulillah, there's a lot of good happening. The community is moving in the right direction. I don't want to be negative. Alhamdulillah, we're not there yet, but we're getting there. People are realizing that this is home. We have to stop living, like ostriches with our head in the mud and pretend everything around us is fine. It's moving in the right directions. People are working together more. So we're getting there. We're not there yet, but alhamdulillah, it's moving in the right direction. There are a lot of national organizations, social organizations, civil rights, political, educational, that are alhamdulillah doing a lot of good work. Yes.
Do you know Imam Siraj al-Hajj?
Yes, Imam Siraj al-Hajj.
Is he part of, because I remember like, I used to live in New England, you talked once about like Malcolm X and the whole mission of Islam, but he never mentioned WD.
So Imam Siraj al-Hajj, I don't know much about it, but I know he was part of that community.
WD.
Yeah, I don't know if it was W.D. Muhammad's community or Elijah Muhammad or he came through the Nation of Islam. I don't know, but I know he has association with it. And there's a lecture online where he talks about how he came to Islam, where he explains more of that. I haven't watched it yet, I should. But I know he had some relationship. I don't know what it was, but he had some association, yes, with that.
He was also part of the Nation of Islam, actually, and that's why
He was?
he says, Imam Siraj al-Hajj actually said that I was part of the Nation of Islam, and that's the way I came to Islam.
Yeah, that's wrong.
So he actually gives them credit for that.
Oh yeah, alhamdulillah. Yeah, I didn't know that. So he came to the nation, I guess. But a lot of brothers in Houston that we meet and in all the masajid, you see them, they came to the nation. So, Allah sets up, in amazing ways. That's history, right? We have a chance that it's done. We can look back and analyze it now. Yes, sister, go ahead. No, I'll clarify. Imam W.D. Muhammad took over the Nation of Islam, and he led it, to Orthodox of Islam. And that community is still, alhamdulillah, they're Muslim, they're part of the general community. Farah Khan, a few years later, broke off and restarted the Nation of Islam. So that Nation of Islam is still alive today and still holds the views that they did before. They're not called anything. They had different names, like it just became general Muslim community. And Imam W.D. Muhammad also, I was told by one of his students that they didn't want to elect another leader after him. They just wanted to become part of the Muslim community. That's why they didn't have one person take over after he did. So, a lot of wisdom. I know we could talk about this all night. Yes, sister.
Do you know if any of the followers of the Nation of Islam still I guess resentment or any ill feelings towards how they took a turn in the other way of separation?
So the question was, do the current Nation of Islam and do they hold any grudges against the African American community that became Muslim? I don't know. Imam Qasim Muhammad would be the great person. And I keep bringing up his name because I've talked to him sometimes bits and pieces, but I've never sat him down and said, look, tell me your whole story of what had happened, how it happened. So I think you need to do that over here. And he's an amazing speaker. He's a very powerful orator, so I think it's going to be extremely, extremely entertaining and impactful when you bring him here. So again, I push you all to bring him over here, inshallah. Yes, sir.
Do you think, after researching all this and talking to these people, do you think, the change would come from the top when it comes, in the past, history repeats, sort of? Does it come from the top, or was it something else?
Sure. So the brother's question was, will the change, whatever change goes on in the future, will it come from the top down or bottom up? In Imam W.D. Muhammad's case, it was clearly top down. It was clearly top down. He's the one who initiated it. He's the one who took action on it. And alhamdulillah, everyone followed him. As far as going forward, I don't know. I'm not sure the context of everything, so I wouldn't have a clear answer for that. But in Imam W.D. Muhammad's case, it was top down. He's the one who initiated it. And then, alhamdulillah, everyone followed him. So I'm not 100% clear on, how it's going to happen in the future. You can tell me whenever you want to stop on. Anybody have a last question or comment? Sister? Anyone? Questions, comments? Oh, yes, yes, brother.
I think you were talking about the nation of Islam and Sunni Islam. I just want to know, you mentioned that there are some kind of different views or way of worship. How far apart is it, in terms of Salat prayer and what I believe? How far are they within the?
So the brother's question was, how far apart are the Nation of Islam and Sunni Islam? How big is the difference? I'm not 100% sure, but I'll tell you what I'm familiar with. It may have changed. I don't know. I'm not sure. So I'm giving that, putting that out there. I know they used to have salah. They used to pray 5 times a day, but it wasn't like the salah we pray. They used to stand, and actually I saw a video, I think they still do pray like that, but I'm not sure. They face the east, and they raise their hands up and just say a few things. That's their prayer, that's their salah. They do that 5 times a day. As far as the theology, again, the basic thing I know is that they believe that Elijah Muhammad and Prophet Muhammad were divine, that these were divine individuals. That, you know, either they were prophets, that, or, you know, Allah coming on earth. And they don't give much emphasis to the life of the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran. And they have still a lot of that, you know, that the blacks are the superior race, black power, and that they were the original human being, Allah has honored them, you know, and the white man is the devil. That was their thing. So their theology is quite different, but I don't know how much is evolved and changed, but it's quite different. So the details of it, you know, the Nation of Islam has a website, like their official website, and you can go on and read their view. You know, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but they have an official website that is kind of like their public domain, where you can read, you know, their version of history and who their imams are and who their schools are. You know that University of Islam that Prophet Muhammad started in, or whatever it was, early 1930s. It's still around. It's still called the University of Islam, and it's a full-time school for the Nation of Islam. They're very strong in the Northeast, so yeah, you can read up on their beliefs over there more, but it's quite different. Most, you know, most Sunni scholars don't really consider them Muslim because of that, but a lot of those might have changed. Sister has a question. Go ahead, no problem.
There's like millions of Muslims in America, so how do they still call themselves Muslims instead of not realizing they don't practice the right way, or do they do things the way like everyone else do?
Are you talking about the Nation of Islam?
The way that they worship.
Okay. I don't know why they think they're right and how they do it. I don't know the specifics, but like I said, I know they're around. I don't know how much heavy their presence is, but that goes back to the question she was asking about why they do it. I'm not sure why they do it. You know, maybe that's something we should find out about. But Allah knows best. You know, it's very. I guess they have their own perspective, right? So, and again, today by no means was a deep, you know, lesson in history. It's just to get you guys thinking about this. A lot of this stuff is new to me. Like I'm finding this stuff out in the last few months. But alhamdulillah, it's so amazing. I feel more empowered knowing this. You know, I feel more motivated to do something. You know, for Islam in this country, and alhamdulillah, the great roots that we have, and how Allah is setting up. You know, I tell my friend who's from the Imam WD community, man, I was like, man, you know, you're a product of some amazing history. You know, you're a product of some amazing history. So I just wanted to get it out there. You know, do your own research, inshallah. One of you can do a detailed presentation on this someday for your community.
Just a quick question. Do they mingle, like, say, for example, somebody comes here to break glass? I've never seen this is something really new to me. So,
the Nation of Islam?
Yes.
Are you talking about the Nation of Islam?
Yeah, people who follow them.
I know they're pretty selective. They don't mingle as much. In fact, as far as I know, no, you know, they're not even, like, if you go to one of their temples, you're not even allowed inside. So the mingling, I know for a fact, is not much.
Like,
why that is, but
like at U of H, Quano X came, like, would come to campus and stuff.
okay. So the brother mentioned there's some interaction, but again, to conclude, I just wanted to get it out there. I'm sure there's a lot of points that I didn't mention, but studying the history, you know, Allah has told us that we can learn a lot from history and take our lessons. Jazakallah khair. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.